have some set of influencers there already with our accountants, and then really built it out from there. But one of the biggest challenges is that our target audience, small businesses, every small business thinks they're different with their problems, and even though they could be using the same product, one's selling widgets, one's selling services, so they use it different ways, or they're in different industries. So there's no way to catch every fly ball and answer every question that a small business launches your way. So that's why we really started the community. And just the nature of the product and the nature of small businesses really helped fuel the growth of it.
One thing I'd love to hear sort of your perspective on, especially with that Intuit background in small business, is this notion of what's an influencer versus who is influential. So, for example, I'm a small businessman.
Yeah.
My local small business association can be influential to me.
Yeah.
And so, as a brand, the things I might do to people like that, from an engagement standpoint, might look like one thing. But the person who answers 1,000 questions a year in your support forums could be influential. And I wonder how you distinguish between those audiences as you go to market, or how you might think about these different channels of influence. Because sometimes this whole influencer conversation gets so muddied around just that one word that we fail to pull it apart and realize that influence means some very different kinds of things.
No, I think it's fair, looking at how people influence and not getting hung up on who the influencer is. And I think that's a really important distinction, because there are different influencers based on product, based on industry, based where companies are in their life cycle, things like that. So for us, or when I looked at it, was really who has the capability to influence somebody else. And I think one of the things that a lot of companies do, which is a mistake, is that they just look at what's that top decile of users, the top influential users. But there's still 90% of your user base who could influence others in any way possible.
It's not moving the needle with all those folks as well, for sure. Go ahead, Steve.
So here's a question for both Pauline and for Scott. One of the things that I wonder is, and this was brought up in the measurement panel, that where we are today, it'll be light years from where we're going to be in 2 years or 5 years from now in terms of understanding. Where do you guys think we need to spend our time next? So what is the next big round of innovation that marketers need to apply to become and remain relevant? One of the things that I heard was, and this is something that Barak Labai from Tel Aviv University really pounds away at, where lead generation is cool, it's sexy, it's fun, engagement, awareness, all of those things are really important, but what are the other things that drive consistency of experience and long-term engagement from a customer standpoint that marketers need to pay attention to? So in your opinion, what are those things?
Unfortunately, the answer is everything.
500 best practices again.
I was talking with Maura from the SMAC organization and Jory yesterday, and Jory was saying we keep on talking about all these metrics, but I don't see the industry really moving forward. And you know me, I'm the queen of analogies. But I said it's kind of like running the city zoo. You have to figure out what the lion eats, order that, what the seal eats. Every one of these things, needs to be treated individually. And it's an enormous amount of work, but if you're going to measure the value beyond, lead gen, that means that you have to measure the value in customer sat. You have to measure the value in product development. It's really the breadth of what you have to do. And the other thing that came up yesterday when Walter did the keynote was the timeline. Mm-hmm. It's much longer. I think many marketing things, the timeline is much shorter. Here you're looking at impact over years. So
I think everyone, in some respects, back to what we were talking about, Pauline, and we've spent some time on the show talking about this as well, is that I think because it's a new channel, people think that, by default, there should just be these brand new metrics that go with it and define it and just be it. But it really goes back to your point, which is you have to map back to what you're trying to accomplish, and some of those metrics already exist. You're already measuring it.
I personally have no interest.
So I think word of mouth, obviously social media has made everyone aware of word of mouth, but from my point of view, writing about this topic, the main thing that has happened between 98 and now is that we're starting to know much more about word of mouth and about communities, I think.
So, Ian, one of the things that we talked about, or we were discussing last night, is how is it from a creative standpoint that brands have sort of missed the boat between creating a visual brand experience and totally separated that out from the community or the online experience, and what do we do about that?
Well, I think the biggest problem is that a lot of brands are still caught up in the tradition and mentality of we're going to come up with an interesting way to talk about our product. We're going to shout it from the mountaintops. We're going to buy up as many impressions or clicks as we can, and we're just going to play the law of averages. And I know if I spend X, I'll get Y. And the problem is, consumers aren't really all that interested in brands talking about themselves anymore. Consumers want you to find them where they are. I mean, indirect traffic now, by some reports, is the #1 source of web traffic. So if you pour everything into a destination, or if you pour everything into just manipulating search, guess what? You lose out on the majority of clicks. But if you want to be relevant to consumers where they are, doing what they're already doing, then it takes a lot more than just boasting about your brand. You actually have to find out what's going on in the consumer's life and deliver something that's going to be relevant and useful to them, almost independently of whatever your brand's agenda is, and then use that as a way to open a dialogue.
So Ian, most of the work that you're doing for Samsung, do you find differences in the Korean market? I mean, like their perspective related to word of mouth activation and social based on what you're doing with that client in particular?
Well, I'm not the be-all, end-all expert on our Asian activities because my focus is North America. But I will tell you, the consumer electronics category as a whole is a bit behind some other areas. I think in the way they're using social media right now.
That's a little strange since people use their devices to do social media. No, I mean,
can't argue.
Good point.
But I think if you lined up, across industries and you looked at the best brands, I mean, Samsung's doing some good stuff, Apple's doing some good stuff, Sony is sort of a social butterfly, but you wouldn't necessarily say any brands in the device space have stepped up to take the sort of leadership that some others have. And I think, again, for so long in the consumer electronics arena, you could build a box and you knew the techies would find it. And if your box was cooler than somebody else's box, that would be enough. It's not the case anymore. And the fact is, there's months of online buzz now that precedes the launch of any consumer electronics product. And to a great extent, as long as you know you have a product that will deliver on expectations, it's tapping that buzz that starts 90 days before you release the product that's probably the greatest opportunity that nobody's taking advantage of. And I think to an extent, that's because everyone's afraid that the box might not live up to the expectations that are set.
I wouldn't say there's one specific thing, but I would definitely say I think the overall lesson that I hear more people saying is that WOM really works, and that there's a lot of evidence being presented here at this meeting that really shows the value of word of mouth marketing, and that the continuation and the growth of it is on the horizon, and it'll be exponential in the next few years.
Awesome. So we want to thank you for continuing to support and sponsor the podcast. So also want to thank everybody that's participated on an ad hoc basis. We had Emmanuel and Scott and John and Ian, and of course we had Blake, and we have Sean, and we had Pauline and Gino, and pretty much all of the people that...
About 1% of the conference.
Right. About 1%.
I think we did.